Hello and welcome to a Splice of Life Science Marketing. This episode is brought to you by Humantic AI. Now imagine if you could close 22.5% more deals overnight using a buyer intelligence platform, or imagine slashing prep time by 70% and boosting close one deals by 37%. That's what customers the world over are achieving using Humantic AI's account and buyer intelligence system. The platform provides firmographic and psychographic insights, so every outreach connects better. Scan the QR code to claim your 10% discount. Now, today's podcast is part 2 of our interview with Bruce Scheer. In part 1, we covered his value narrative framework and talked a little bit about his book, Inspire Your Buyers, as well as a wonderful story about buying a fishing boat. In part 2, in today's episode, we're covering emotional value and technical complexity, sales and marketing alignment, and of course, no interview will be complete without talking about the role of AI in sales and marketing. Without further ado, let's get on with the show.
A lot of our listeners sort of market life science tools or products that are really, really complex and technical. And their buyers can be really skeptical, sort of data-driven people. Completely get the emotion piece, and I'm a big believer in the approach. But do you have any tips on being able to translate something that's really, really technical into a compelling story that still rings true to the scientist, especially when that pain of switching can actually sort of feel like an insurmountable kind of mountain?
As we're crafting a narrative and it's complex, I was brought into Alcatel-Lucent. At the time, they had 146 products, and talk about complexity. So we quickly went to simplifying that into a solution framework with 4 pieces. So all those random various products had a home within a category, 4 categories. So we had to figure out the solution side of what we were selling and how do we simplify this in a way that a human brain can wrap their head around it. But then also still, getting into a core narrative. So with Alcatel-Lucent and working with their head of strategy, he said something that I heard, and I'm going, oh my gosh, that's it. We coined a big idea concept called dynamic enterprise. And the beauty in that is when we went in to talk to enterprises, we could talk about this big idea of dynamic enterprise, but contrasting that with where they are today, which is anything but dynamic, bureaucratic, slow, lethargic. And that created just an immense amount of emotional tension. And again, the value very often is in that tension or contrast between, what current state is and what future state could be. But that's typically what I'll do. I'll try to find some core concepts like that. I'll name them, which is a little bit unusual. I don't see other people in my field naming things as much as I do, but I like to name my big problem. I like to name the outcome. I like to name the solution in 4 words or less. And it used to be 3 words or less until Trump ran with the campaign, Make America Great Again, which is probably one of the best campaigns ever run. Politics aside and fandom aside, I do give him credit. He didn't invent that. Ronald Reagan ran with that way in the past. But boy, talk about moving the universe with a powerful phrase. So that helped me break my model into no more than 4 words or less. But I don't know if that helps in terms of helping people. You still want to get them excited about the potentiality before you start doing all the due diligence and stress testing and all that detail to follow. Here's another really interesting statistic for you, a 2025 statistic. There's an organization called G2 that does a lot of buyer research. And I met their head of research a couple months ago, and he had just come out with a fresh report with a huge data set. But if you have a high consideration solution, meaning it's disruptive, it's very complex, multiple buyers, expensive, big investment, chances are 42% of those opportunities that you might be selling against, 42% of those require C-suite checkoff. And of that 42%, 20% of the 42% of that number is CFOs. So if you've got a high consideration solution, chances are 1 out of 5 of your deals, opportunities require CFO checkoff. 42% of your opportunities require at least somebody in the C-suite. Very often, those people in the C-suite are held accountable for fiscal responsibility of their organization. And so, my argument is you better have a business case for those folks and showcase the economic or the financial value associated with that change. And that's very helpful. And rare is the seller who does that, supports the buyer in doing that. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
If we sort of continue on the theme of organizations and how they think, one of the topics that's very near and dear to my heart is sales and marketing alignment. I actually moderated a session about a month ago at the Marketing Elements Summit in DC on this topic. From your experience, how does a shared narrative help get everyone on the same page? And equally importantly, what kind of outcomes can an aligned commercial team realize?
An aligned commercial team isn't very normal. I'll tell you that based on my 25 years of working with them. Normally marketing's doing what they're doing and banging a drum, and their metrics are around, MQLs or,
Yep.
So they've got their own vanity metrics that they're trying to hit. And then they throw that over the wall. Hey, sellers, here you go. Here's your leads that you've been asking for. Gosh, it was really funny. I was in a workshop with sales and marketing because I normally do a cross-functional team when I'm building a narrative. Autodesk, who you guys have probably heard of. I had their rock star sales rep in the room, and I'm like going, hey, how's marketing working for you? How are their leads? And he goes, oh, Bruce, I tell one of my SDRs that works for me, I tell him to ignore anything from marketing. And so Peter, the marketing leader, was in the room too. I go, hey, Peter, did you hear that? And he's like, gives me this sheepish, embarrassed look. He did hear that. But, the rock star seller said marketing's leads are a waste of time. So they're, just complete misalignment on the buying journey, where marketing's saying something and sales saying something else. And so that creates buyer confusion, which is never a good thing, especially the role they have to play in buying, which can be quite daunting, especially for high consideration solutions. If you create mismessaging, either they're going to skip you or you're going to create confusion, lower their confidence, where they can't buy. And last time I looked, it's still there, but 6 out of 10 opportunities end in no deal, no action. Isn't that horrifying? All that time and energy and nothing changes, nothing moves. When it does happen, it's magic. And I've had that magic happen for me multiple times, luckily. But it's never, I don't think it's ever happened where it's been overly pleasant. But I was out in London, Matt. I did a project for a company called Concur before they were acquired by SAP. And out in London, a group of marketers cornered me. And one of the VPs said, Bruce, you have made our life miserable. And I'm like going, oh my gosh, hey, I am sorry. I don't know what I did. And he goes, well, Robson, who was their CMO, saw a sales narrative that I had made for their commercial sales team and loved it. And then went back to his marketing organization, said, hey, stop our brand marketing. I want to redo everything around this. Because he saw the value. Former Citrix CMO as well, but, very seasoned CMO. He saw the value in that alignment that they did not have. Marketing was talking about stuff that, sellers would certainly not be talking about in their selling conversations. So just complete misalignment. And he wanted to solve for that problem. I don't know if I've told you about a company called CETA, but I worked with them across the world. Their chief commercial officer, thank goodness, I met him in Dubai at one of their global sales kickoffs. So they did a big, huge round robin. And at the end of it, he felt like hanging himself. He just felt royally sick and distraught. Because CETA, they'd been around since World War II, and he was trying to rebrand CETA rightfully as an incredibly innovative organization and a pioneer that's still progressive and in the forefront. And the sellers were making it sound like, CETA was old and stodgy and stuck in their ways, and, just sending signals, brand signals that he absolutely didn't want. And so thank goodness I was there, had lunch with him. He was really bummed. I'm like going, hey, we need a unified narrative. And so we called it Seed a Story for Sales, so the sellers could have a better narrative that they could use in their introductory selling conversations. But very interestingly, the narrative we built became the impetus for their whole organization's reorganization with their new CEO, and that's the power of getting this right. And then, when you have that, that crossover executive, like this gentleman's name was Arthur, the chief commercial officer, he could make sure both sides of the house were speaking a similar language and having a similar go-to-market narrative. So it's when it happens, Jasmine, which isn't all that often, of course, the promise is, more revenue growth when you do have that alignment internally and externally. And with CETA, for example, it was kind of funny. They have a whole analyst team, and they do their annual survey of the air and transportation sector, and they come out with their big insights and point of views around those insights, and that becomes also a growth engine for them and part of their innovation that they bring to the market. I got in touch with one of the analyst team and said, hey, would you be interested in understanding the story that the sellers are telling? And he's like going, yeah, sounds kind of cool. And I go, yeah, because if you understood that, you could probably help your sellers. And he's like, trying to connect the dots, but I was like going, yeah, based on the narrative that they're saying, you could help give them some gravity, some insights, some statistics that they could bring into their selling conversations and make them that much better. And then he's starting to get it. Oh my God, that sounds awesome. And so what I did is, we had built different narratives for their different solution domains. And I shared that with him, the all up and the solution stories. So that person could do a better job of designing their thought leadership questionnaires, their studies to get the right information to fuel these better selling conversations, as well as their marketing thought leadership platform.
While I think a lot of companies recognize that the rift between sales and marketing is not healthy, and they sort of talk about how to fix it, I think what they most importantly forget is the impact on the future buyer when you have that rift.
Well, you say future buyer. Weirdly enough, Jasmine, it's actually the existing buyer as well. You wouldn't believe how many buyers buy and have remorse after they buy. There's confusion, remorse, and then in this whole world of everything as a service, there's also a big drop-off rate where customers, cancel subscriptions or cancel contracts. They want to consolidate. There's other reasons. Nobody's using it. And so these narratives can also be incredibly clarifying and useful for existing buyers, giving them the reason to stay. And customers that stay are, way more profitable than acquiring new customers. Of course, we've all seen those economics. But in this day and age, especially with the tough economy that we're in right now, many organizations, go-to-market teams are doubling down on existing customers, looking for white space. How do we upsell, cross-sell, grow with our existing customers? And that's where a compelling narrative, this contextual narrative, can be so helpful for them, and not only keeping the contract, but adding to that or adding additional solutions to the contract, as well as those future customers, as you say, Jasmine.
It makes sense.
Keeping on the sort of narrative story, you've said that, that we're talking about this stuff, and that one of the things in the book I really liked was that you said an awful lot about trying to get people to be bolder. There's a bit of an old adage in the in the marketing world that nobody gets fired for playing it safe. It's only the people that take those big bold risks that fail that tend to get let go. But you kind of said the opposite, that playing it too safe is actually the far bigger risk. We both work in a very, shall we say, conservative industry that tends to for years everything was kind of pale blue and white. How do you encourage companies to be more audacious with their narratives, and how do you get them to be bolder?
You really bring back an old story. I did some work for McKesson Technologies, and I want to see if I've got a visual in here. One of the big things that I work on is a narrative. We start with words, but then how can we visualize the narrative? And I don't know if you can remember that chapter. I spent a whole chapter on talking about the importance of that, just to help customers truly understand what you're trying to speak to, the problem, the outcome, the solution that you're speaking around. But how can you help them visualize that as well? And if you can, memory goes way up, the retention of that. But also, you probably heard the framing of a picture's worth 1,000 words. You see the picture, you get a big aha moment. And a friend of mine loves to cite this. Have you seen Daniel Pink's some of his animate videos in the past? One was on drive, motivation. And this buddy of mine, had a degree in organizational development and loved the book, but was kind of confused. But he reads the whole book, likes it, but he sees that video and just bang, light bulbs go off, that animation, that story. So when, you get a great narrative, you help visualize it. But once that happens, this one project with McKesson Technology, such a great narrative, beautiful visual, and the sellers that had that, I was talking to one of the general managers there, and what he had witnessed was the sellers became so much more confident in their outreach to their prospects and in their selling conversations, because they just knew they were on it. There was big value in it, extremely clear story. The buyers could get it quite quickly. The magic would happen. And so their confidence in selling their platform, instead of selling this complex platform, they had a very simplified narrative that people would buy into. And it elevated their confidence, their boldness, and they were so much more effective because of that. And you want your sellers super excited and convicted about what they're selling. And that's what this narrative was able to do, just kind of overnight, introducing that new narrative. They're like going, yeah, this is gold. And I've had that happen again and again when they are loaded right with a great narrative. It's so empowering, both for them and also their buyers. Very often I'll teach sellers to whiteboard the narrative in front of their client. And so when we design the visuals, we design for whiteboard first. And then you can create animations around it, marketing things, and, update the website, et cetera. But first and foremost, we typically start with doodles, stick figures that sellers could truly draw on a whiteboard. And you wouldn't believe how many times that sellers have said, hey, Bruce, I went back to my prospect. Oh my God, you wouldn't believe it. That whiteboard that I drew, it was still there. And I'm like going, not a surprise. I've heard it so many times that wasn't your whiteboard anymore. It became their whiteboard, and they used it to retell the story. The CEO didn't want to erase it from the whiteboard because it was so compelling. So that transfer of ownership of that narrative can be incredibly useful for that internal buying journey that the seller's typically not involved with.
Fantastic. I mean, it's incredibly powerful. I actually saw a stat from, I think one of our mutual friends, Dr. Lisa Palmer, who posted something on LinkedIn recently about the amount of revenue per employee, and McKesson leads with about $8.2 million per employee. And so if those value narratives are delivering that kind of return, how can anybody not take this up as an approach?
Yeah, well, and so many don't, but you'd be surprised. You just truly would be surprised. In one of my workshops, have you guys ever heard of a company called Razorfish? Yeah, so Razorfish, it's the two founders of Razorfish. 60 Minutes decides to interview them because they're just so wildly successful. At the time, they were valued at $4 billion. And so they're asking the co-founders, hey, could you explain just in a nutshell, like you did with me, Matt, what do you guys do? And they couldn't really answer the question. They said, we help business recontextualize themselves. And the 60-minute guy goes, recontextualize? That's kind of confusing. Could you make it simple? What do you do? And they just couldn't. But here they are, $4 billion company. doing okay. Organizations exist and thrive without a narrative. But my argument is if they do have or if they can have one, which few do, especially few do that put the buyer as the hero. If they do have that, you can see just, wild success. One of my clients, Tableau, I built their sales narrative pre-IPO and they just exploded. Of course, the technology was awesome and the use cases were great, et cetera. But I'm telling you, that organization, they took my narrative and they made a whole company training. I even have a story about a woman in training and development using it with a prospect down in Vegas and getting a deal. She wasn't even carrying it, in a sales capacity. They just believed everybody needs this story. This is it. And it became part of their whole company training from chairman all the way down. When people can align around that, the world can change much faster. And typically, a lot of people might think that they have a narrative. And what I typically ask, especially, show me a picture of the problem that you guys solve. And that's the total shakeout, where they're like, going, what do you mean? I'm like, going, okay, let me repeat myself. Show me a picture of the problem you solve. And they can't, because they don't have a picture like that. They have a picture of their tech, but they don't have a picture of the customer world and how they're impacted and how that could change. That visualizations like that typically don't exist.
Yeah, I love that story, and I love that question about show me a picture. I think a lot of product managers could also learn a lot from that way of thinking. But I wanted to pivot for a second. I was listening to your discussion with A. Lee Judge on the Business Marketing Podcast.
Yeah, sure. Uh-huh.
And you quoted this metric that just blew my mind. And that was 59% of influence on a big B2B buying decision comes from the buying experience. Yeah. And only 41% on the influence comes from the offering. Yeah. Experience outweighs offering on a buying decision. But with most buyers getting at least 70% of the way through a buying decision before contacting a company representative, the experience is wildly dependent on a digital person-free experience. A little counterintuitive. What advice can you give commercial teams to mitigate this situation?
Yeah, it's such an interesting dynamic now, because buyers don't want to engage with sellers, and there many marketing organizations have started to kind of like go, okay, well, we get it, we hate dealing with sales too, makes sense. And I've even heard CMOs go, and yeah, our sellers are just order takers, they're useless, and you get into all this posturing stuff. But here's one of the other counterintuitive statistics. Buyers that do all that self-research and buy often have buyer's remorse at a huge percent. I think, I'll have to fact check this, but roughly 4 out of 10 buyers who bought think they made the wrong decision after they bought and are unhappy with where they're at. And then the renewal rate, doesn't go. And so there is a role to play for sellers. And I typically counter with this consumer-based response, but I was working with a company called eBay Motors. It's part of eBay. And they sell thousands and thousands and thousands of cars every year on eBay. The team I was working with, they were going dealership to dealership saying, hey, if you got extra stock, throw it on eBay and you can sell it there and get more turnover, and it'll improve your business. And so when I wanted to build those sellers a narrative so they could go out to dealerships and tell that story. So I asked eBay, who's your number one dealership in the world throwing their stock up on eBay and driving a lot of sales? They go, oh, that's easy, Lexus of Atlanta. So I arranged a meeting with the owners of that dealership and said, hey, tell me, why is this working for you, et cetera. But then I out of curiosity, I asked them, hey, how many customers that come out there, or buyers that already purchased their car online, how many of those buyers drive away with the car that they bought? And again, they flew from their home state all the way to Atlanta, hopped on a train, took the train to the dealership that was right off the train line, went in there to pick up their keys so they could drive the car that they bought home. How many of those buyers drove their car home? Could you help me with that? Just take a guess.
Yes.
What percent of the buyers drove the car that they bought home?
50%.
No, 80%. So 4 out of 5 of those buyers drove their car home. Why'd you say 50?
My thinking was because that's when the seller got in there and started talking them up into a different solution. So built a different kind of relationship with them, and they were persuasive enough to convince them to buy something else half of the time. So I was giving them a lot of credit.
You can call it powers of persuasion, but I would argue they were able to help 1 out of 5 buyers get into a more suitable car. Hey, Bruce, you're here to pick up your Porsche. Oh, wow, that's a sexy Porsche. You're going to look so cool. Tell me about your life. Are you single? No, I got a wife. Not kids yet? No, I got 3 kids. Are they in school? Yeah, oh, yeah. And do they have friends? Yeah. And how do you shuttle them around? I don't know. Hey, Bruce, instead of getting that Porsche, would you be interested in a minivan? I could make sure you get a sport edition. so you still look cool. But I use that as an extreme example, but they were able to help people find, the right car. Because a lot of people make assumptions. I buy things online and it shows up at the house. I'm like, why did I buy this? This isn't what I was expecting. That happens in these B2B deals as well. So there is a role for sales to play in these buyer journeys. So, the world is the way it is, and sellers haven't earned that right. And many buyers, actually want to run from sales. Again, 75% of buyers prefer to have a sales-free experience, according to Gartner. And it's broken. But if the buyer tries to take it all the way on their own, there's a huge risk of remorse and just making the wrong decision on behalf of their organization. So I don't know if that's helpful at all. But on the marketing side, you can still lead with that narrative. And my firm, we build value calculators, especially if it does require that executive checkoff. The business case is super duper helpful in that regard. 9 out of 10 deals often require business value justification, even by the procurement system. It's a form that they have to fill out. So you need to go there on many of these high consideration solutions or bold solutions based on that buying experience stat that you gave. So you can support that online. And we do that as well. Try to give the buyer information they need to do a better, make a better buying decision. And so that's our mindset, to try to support that online and with the sellers.
Finally, Bruce, I've got one last question for you, and I'd like you to put your futurologist's hat on, if you will. I know I've had a chance to sort of check out that the business case calculator. I know it involves quite a bit of AI with it, and it is really cool. What trends or changes should sales and marketing professionals really be preparing for? Especially if they want to keep inspiring their buyers in the next 5 years.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed Mark Schaefer's latest book, How AI is Changing Your Customers. Matt, you've probably read it as well, I'm guessing. So I liked some of his points of view. I've witnessed that myself, and even my own behavior. Very often I was buying a pair of boots and I was leveraging ChatGPT to help me buy boots. And it was really hilarious. I already had a pair of boots, and I uploaded it into ChatGPT, and I'm like going, should I buy these boots? And ChatGPT said, well, you could, but if you want to be a progressive, contemporary, maybe a little bit older, but yet a little bit wiser, CEO type person, I'd only recommend wearing those boots on the weekend, perhaps walking your dog. It's just going, oh my goodness. I already bought these things. And it just cracked me up. But I think a lot, I tell that story, but I believe a lot of people are starting to lean more heavily on AI as part of that buying journey and getting points of view. So, how can we show up better in AI? To support, the AI as buyer, the agent to the buyer. How do we support that agent in getting the right information to feed back into that buying committee? So I think that's one extremely hot topic, both today for kind of first movers, but for laggards, that's going to be a big issue moving forward in the world of consumer and B2B sales and marketing. I think. The other exciting thing that I see is how AI is really helping sellers do a better job of understanding their customer and showing up ready. The bigger concept behind that, I think, is respect for the buyer and service to the buyer. How can I do more on my end to make life easier for my buyer? And I think AI really supports that philosophy. How can I create the best buying experience possible to help them in their buying journey internally, which is incredibly daunting? How can I help them do that? And then how can I just make sure, we're the vendor of choice if it's a good fit and have that mindset? But AI can really help connect the dots in that way.
Brilliant.
And Matt, did you have a point of view on that as well? That was just mine. I know you think a lot about the future too.
I think I love sort of talking about coming up, being more prepared. Our podcast is sponsored by Humantic AI, who sort of create both sort of accounts intelligence and buyer intelligence. So one, it can allow you to really go out and better understand the big trends that are impacting the business as a whole. So you can have that, so you've got a better chance of tailoring your value narrative actually to the business and its problems that are happening right now. And then also being able to understand who's in the room and what kind of personality profiles you've got. So you're actually able to then look at all of those different buyers, whether it's 7 or 12, and be able to understand, especially if you can, you know who you're meeting and who's in that group, being able to understand some of the personality types and then actually how to engage with them better. So that's one of the big things that I've really been espousing for recently. But I think it's all about connection. I think we connect through story and narrative. We connect by better knowing the customer's context better, their problems better, and really being able to really respect them as much as possible and the problems that they have. And if you have the solution, then it's almost wrong if you don't manage to actually convey the value that you can give in the best possible way.
No, I completely agree. I love your idea around connection as well. I've been speaking a lot about the charisma edge lately, and you and I have talked about that a bit. But if I get the right or earn the right to have a selling conversation with a potential buyer, I've got between a nanosecond and 4 seconds to show up with enough presence, create a perception in their mind that this person is trustworthy and the person's, smart. They're going to help me. And how can you do that so fast? And that's this charismatic effect that I'm actually trying to help B2B sellers master more of, and leaders who support them. How can they be more charismatic right out of the gate, and then continue to earn that right based on the homework they did, the value that they can bring, those subsequent conversations. But even out of the get-go, how do we establish trust and credibility within 4 seconds? I think we, in the future, we need to upgrade our human operating system is what I've been talking about. How can we do a better job of connecting when we have these beautiful moments of truth? How can we connect better?
That's so important. I don't think relationship building will ever go away.
Oh gosh.
If you can be a futurist, that I think is the foundation of all of this. But I think what's going to change is how quickly you can build that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just the imperative for that. You bet.
Thank you so much for today, Bruce. I've learned so much, and it's been brilliant having you on. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all your insights. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. My pleasure.